Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question of suspending the rules on passing H.R. 9748, which the clerk will report by title.
H.R. 9748, a bill to require the Undersecretary of the Science and Technology Director of the Department of Homeland Security to develop a department-wide policy and process to safeguard research and development from unauthorized access to or disclosure of sensitive information in research and development acquisitions and for other purposes.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? So many as are in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the question on suspending the rules and passing H.R. 8662, which the clerk will report by title.
Union Calendar Number 533, H.R. 8662. A bill to reduce commuting burdens on Transportation Security Administration employees and for other purposes.
Question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass the bill? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The chair lays before the House a communication.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., December 20th, 2024. I hereby designate the period from Friday, December 20th, 2024, through the remainder of the 118th Congress as a district work period under Section 3Z of House Resolution 5. Signed sincerely, Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Gavel is safe. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members are requested to take their merriment off the floor. Conversations off the floor. Members are requested to take their conversations off the floor. The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The chair will now entertain requests for one-minute speeches. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the House is still not in order.
Gentleman will suspend. The House will come to order. Members are requested to take their conversations off the floor. The gentleman from Pennsylvania is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the outstanding achievement of Warren County native Mitchell Angove. Mitchell was recently named to Forbes 30 Under 30 list. This list is produced annually by Forbes magazine and recognizes notable individuals under the age of 30 nationwide. A native Pennsylvanian, Mitchell attended the Eisenhower High School in Russell, Pennsylvania. He graduated in 2018 and earned his bachelor's and master's degree throughout the following years. Today, Mitchell is the co-founder and CEO of Phoenix Biotechnologies. His company is helping transform the agriculture industry by analyzing animal genomes to predict traits such as size, milk production, and other key health factors. As the chairman of the House Agricultural Committee, I've seen firsthand the issues currently affecting our American farmers. And I'm proud to see motivated individuals such as Mitchell continue to pursue advancements that could help farmers nationwide. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my 30th Maui minute, and after months of delay, 3 successive requests from President Biden, and unnecessary anxiety for millions of Americans, courtesy of the richest man in the world, Congress will now finally send much-needed disaster recovery funding across the country. For over a year, I've led bipartisan efforts pushing to deliver this aid to Maui. We've delivered speeches in this chamber, we've sent letters to leadership, introduced amendments that were blocked. Finally, we got this done. This disaster recovery package will provide a much-needed boost to meeting our people's needs. The package will send over $2.1 billion in federal disaster relief to Hawaii, including about $1.6 billion in the Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Fund, or CDBG-DR, $350 million to rebuild drinking water and wastewater infrastructure, and $72 million to rebuild roads and bridges. It will replenish the Small Business Administration's disaster loans program so homeowners and small businesses can continue to recover. For my Maui constituents still recovering from the deadly fires, it has been far too long a wait, but I know our work will not stop here. We will use these dollars to rebuild housing and infrastructure, restore our Aina, and bring our Maui ohana home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back. Mahalo.
Gentlewoman yields. You're welcome. Gentlewoman, for what purpose does the gentlewoman from Michigan seek recognition? The gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the concluding salvo of this Congress to thank the 118th session for allowing me to advocate for the incredible constituents and communities that comprise my district. From our robust manufacturing economy to our amazing public schools to the hardworking tradespeople building homes and new factories. Most of all, I would like to recognize my team, the staff here in Washington, D.C. and in Farmington Hills, who are sleeves rolled up, helping people each and every day. We've offered over 31 unique bills, 2 that have become signed into law, and 6 that passed this very chamber. So here's to the 118th session and more to come. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And still I rise, Mr. Speaker, very honored and very proud to stand here and have this preeminent opportunity to speak for 1 minute. I speak tonight with the expression of gratitude because this is a season of giving and the season of being grateful for that which we have. And I want to thank all of the many persons who have made it possible for us to have these opportunities. I'm especially grateful to the staff that I have that has worked tirelessly over this year. And while everything did not go as I would have it, I do appreciate the fact that there will not be a shutdown, that the American people can go on about their way, enjoy this and make it the best holiday ever. And I would say to all of my colleagues, we should say thank you to each other for getting this done. There ought to be a thank you to the 196 Democrats, a thank you to the 170 Republicans. I yield back. Thank you.
Pursuant to Section 3Z of House Resolution 5, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, December 24th, 2024. Merry Christmas.
Mr. Rounds, no. Mr. Reed, aye. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Peters, aye. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, no. Mr. Cotton, no. Mrs. Hyde Smith, no. Mr. Wyden, aye. Mr. Tuberville, no. Ms. Duckworth, aye. Mr. Hawley, no. Mr. Wicker, no. Mrs. Fisher, no. Mr. Schumer, aye. Mrs. Capito, no. Mr. King. Mr. King, aye. Mr. Lujan. Mr. Lujan, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, no. Mr. Thune. Mr. Thune, no. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, aye. Mr. Warnock. Mr. Warnock, aye. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, no. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, no. Mrs. Shaheen. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, no. Ms. Hirono. Ms. Hirono, aye. Mr. Braun. Mr. Braun, no. Mr. Marshall. Mr. Marshall, no. Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott of Florida, no. Mr. Kelly, aye. Mr. Ossoff, aye. Mr. Lee, no. Mr. Graham, no. Ms. Hassan, aye.
Chairman.
Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Cornyn, no. Ms. Cortez Masto, aye. Mr. Barrasso, no. Mr. Hoven, no. Mr. Carper, aye. Ms. Ernst, no. Mr. Schmidt, no. Mrs. Britt, no. Mr. Moran, no. Mr. Ricketts, no. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Grassley, no. Mr. Johnson, no. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Ms. Stabenow, aye. Mr. Cruz, no. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Young, no. Mr. Merkley, aye. Ms. Warren, aye. Mr. Cassidy, no. Ms. Rosen, aye. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Hickenlooper, aye. Mr. Blumenthal, aye. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Brown, aye. Mr. Markey, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Romney, no. Ms. Lummis, no. Mr. Gillibrand, aye. Mr. Murphy, aye. Ms. Sinema, aye. Mr. Fetterman, aye. Mr. Welch, aye. Mr. Booker, aye. Yes. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, aye.
On this vote, the yeas are 49 and the nays are 47. This nomination of Serena Raquel Murillo is confirmed. The motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the President will be immediately notified of the Senate's action. And under the previous order, the Senate will resume a legislative session, and the clerk will report the pending business.
Calendar number 693, H.R. 82, an act to amend Title II of the Social Security Act to repeal the government pension offset and windfall elimination provisions.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
we just passed our 235th judge. It is historic. It sets a record. In a few moments, I'll be speaking about that. But first, let us finish our housekeeping and other business so we can finish the business for the Senate for this year. So I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on calendar number 693, H.R. 82, an act to amend Title II of the Social Security Act and so forth, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I further ask that the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes an amendment number 3355.
I ask to dispense with further reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have a second-degree amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes an amendment number 3356 to amendment number 3355.
I ask to dispense with further reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
I move to commit H.R. 82 to the Committee on Finance with instructions to report back forthwith with an amendment.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, moves to commit H.R. 82 to the Committee on Finance with instructions to report back forthwith amendment number 3357.
I ask to dispense with further reading.
Without objection.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have an amendment to the instructions at the desk.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes amendment number 3358 to the instructions of the motion to commit.
I ask to dispense with further reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The yeas and nays are ordered.
I have a second-degree amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report.
The senator from New York, Mr. Schumer, proposes an amendment number 3359 to amendment number 3358.
I ask to dispense with further reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, as you well know, a few minutes ago, the Senate confirmed Judge Murillo to serve as a California district judge. She is the 235th judge confirmed by this majority. The majority has now confirmed more judges under President Biden than any majority has confirmed in decades. This is historic. We have confirmed more judges than under the Trump administration, more judges than any administration in this century, more judges than any administration going back decades. 1 out of every 4 active judges on the bench has been appointed by this majority. Let me repeat that. 1 out of every 4 active judges on the bench has been appointed by this majority. Together, these individuals are arguably the most qualified and historic nominees ever confirmed in a 4-year span. I want to thank all senators, Democrat and Republican, who supported these nominees. Both parties cooperating on many of these judges shows why the advise and consent process is critical to this body and to our democracy. 235 judges. That's 235 qualified and experienced mainstream judges. They are former consumer protection lawyers, labor lawyers, voting rights experts, civil rights lawyers, federal prosecutors, public defenders, teachers, mentors, scholars, great Americans from every walk of life and legal practice. I am very proud of this milestone, not because of the number alone, but because of what the number means. It means our bench is now far more balanced in its experiences, expertise, and qualifications than 4 years ago. For a very long time, the norm was to prioritize judicial nominees who came from a privileged pool. Most of them were prosecutors or from large corporate law firms. Most were male, most were white. But when Senate Democrats entered the majority, we cast a wider net. We turned to new individuals who would make excellent and uniquely qualified judges. For example, we confirmed nominees who represented union workers and had firsthand experience in union negotiations. We confirmed nominees who fought health care fraud in court and represented the public in cases of deceptive marketing tactics. Our nominees have defended the right to vote. They have defended freedom of choice, represented victims of abuse. They have put criminals and drug traffickers behind bars. They have been teachers. They have been mentors. Our nominees are also groundbreaking for their democratic diversity. 150 of these judges are women, more than most under any president. We confirmed the first black woman to the highest court in all the land, Ketanji Brown Jackson. She is also the first public defender to ever hold the title justice. We confirmed the most black judges, Hispanic judges, and AAIP judges and Native American judges under any president's full time in office. All of these historic judges were confirmed because they were exceptionally qualified for the job. Our courts, like all our institutions, are better off when they mirror this vibrant country. There's a lot of people to thank. I want to thank at the top of the list you, Mr. President and Chairman Durbin, for your diligence and hard work. I want to thank Ranking Member Graham and the members of the Judiciary Committee, some of whom are here, for their great work. You recommended excellent individuals to the bench. I want to thank, of course, President Biden for sending us such an impressive group of well-qualified and historic nominees, and I want to thank Vice President Harris, who came here when the vote was tied and helped us confirm a number of these nominees. Finally, and thank you to our Republican colleagues, who recommended good nominees and supported many of ours as well. Finally, I want to thank my great staff, especially my incredible nominations director, Catalina Tam. It wouldn't have happened without her diligent and hard work. A lot of behind-the-scenes work happened to get them confirmed, and so I'm immensely grateful to everyone who worked tirelessly day in, day out. Thanks to the hard work of this Senate majority, our courts are stronger, our country is stronger, our democracy is stronger, and that is something every American can be proud of. I yield the floor. Nope, I don't yield the floor. I move to proceed to executive session to consider Calendar 851.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Amtrak Board of Directors, David Michael Capozzi of Maryland to be a director.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Counter Number 851, David Michael Capozzi of Maryland to be a director of the Amtrak Board of Directors, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider Calendar 854.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. Motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Amtrak Board of Directors, Aline Marie Clegg of Idaho to be a director.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
Clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar Number 854, Elaine Marie Clegg of Idaho to be a director of the Amtrak Board of Directors, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I yield the floor.
Okay, great. Mr. President?
Congratulations, Dick.
Mr. President?
The senator from New York.
Mr. President, if you've ever had kids, you know how important it can be to encourage their education. But with many competing priorities, you sometimes need to use creative strategies to inspire success. That is something the Holcomb Rucker did. Rucker was a black World War II veteran and a teacher in the 1940s in Harlem. He started a small outdoor basketball team for black youth and encouraged his players to maintain good grades and decorum. Some say he is the father of outdoor organized basketball for youth and helped give thousands of kids better pathways to higher learning. Holcomb Rucker grew up a poor, parentless kid from 141st Street. He served in the Army during World War II before earning his bachelor's degree from City College. He then taught English at a Harlem junior high school while also serving as a recreation director for both the St. Philip's Church Community Center and the City Parks Department. When Rucker formed his youth basketball tournament in the late 1940s, however, he didn't get much support from city recreational leaders. So he often paid out of his own shallow pockets to provide refreshments and T-shirts and other essentials for players. Rucker would even share his lunch with his students, often coming home to his wife with an empty stomach. Rucker believed education and supervised recreation could make an enormous difference in the lives of his students. It's no surprise then when many of his players saw him as a father figure and credited him with helping them set them on a better path. As Rucker's summer tournaments grew in popularity, Parks Department officials finally moved them to a more desirable location. That would ultimately become the Holcomb Rucker Park. The court attracted the city's most talented young basketball players, including future professional basketball stars like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, and Julius Dr. J. Irving. I want to thank Congressman Espaillat for championing this bill, and I'm proud to lead the effort in the Senate to designate this park, which is located at 155th Street on the banks of the Harlem River, as the Holcomb Rucker Park National Commemorative Site. This bill would allow for an educational exhibit, a plaque, and another marker to be installed that would help memorialize the legacy of Mr. Rucker for generations to come. I want to thank Senator Rubio for his assistance. I ask unanimous consent that the Committee on Energy and Natural Resources be discharged from further consideration of H.R. 6852 and the Senate proceed to an en bloc consideration of the following bills. H.R. 8012, which was received from the House and is at the desk, and H.R. 6852.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measures en bloc.
I ask unanimous consent that the bills be considered read a third time and passed, and the motions be reconsidered, be considered made and laid upon the table, all en bloc.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I yield the floor. Absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll. Ms. Waldman.
Mr. President.
Senator from Idaho.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to suspend the quorum call.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I expect that sometime this evening the Senate will move to consideration of the Social Security Fairness Act, which would repeal two Social Security provisions: the windfall elimination provision, pronounced WEP, and the government pension offset, GPO. I agree with my colleagues that the WEP and GPO should be improvised to ensure that teachers, fighters, police officers, and others receive fair treatment under Social Security. However, I'm disappointed that the Finance Committee did not have the opportunity to examine ways to address the WEP and GPO and that would be fair to all Social Security beneficiaries and not hurt the Social Security's long-term solvency. In its current form, the Social Security Fairness Act would cost nearly $200 billion over the next 10 years and exhaust the balance of the Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust Fund roughly 6 months earlier for all Social Security beneficiaries. The share of OASI benefits that could be paid when the trust fund is exhausted would be smaller under this bill than under current law, meaning all Social Security beneficiaries will see their Social Security benefits reduced earlier, and their benefits then will be even smaller than they would have been. I filed an amendment that would delay the implementation of the Social Security Fairness Act until changes are made that would offset the bill's negative impact on the Social Security's actuarial balance, as determined by the Social Security Board of Trustees. The amendment does not specify what the changes should be or how the changes should be determined. While I continue to have concerns with the approach taken in the Social Security Fairness Act, at the very least, this amendment needs to be adopted so that we do not have a negative impact on Social Security's solvency and impact the Social Security benefits of all Social Security recipients. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment when it comes up. That will be the Crapo Amendment number 3331. And Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from North Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just wanted to get up and explain why I'll be voting against the passage of the Social Security Fairness Act a little bit later today. I'm going to try and keep the volume down and maybe the frustration down a little bit more today than I did yesterday, but I thought it was important to again explain why sometimes the tough vote is the right vote. To kind of lay the groundwork, as I am from North Carolina, I'm up for re-election in November of 2026. I've heard some people walk up and down the hallway and say that they really oppose the bill, but they're up for election in 28 or up for election in 30, and they're worried about the politics of it. I never worry about the politics when I'm convinced in my heart of hearts it's the right decision. And let me explain why. The Social Security Fairness Act is trying to address what I think is an inequity and a problem. Unfortunately, it's doing it in a way that is at the expense of $200 billion out of the Social Security Trust Fund without a dime offsetting it. Now, some of my fiscal conservative colleagues have said, well, no, it's not really depleting it because it's the Social Security Trust Fund, so it's not adding to our debt. But what they are forgetting is that when Social Security Trust Fund becomes solvent, the fairies don't come back and replenish the Social Security Trust Fund. We don't have trust fund fairies. What we have is a debt that is already over $33 trillion that we're going to be expected to write another check out of. And we're headed towards a debt crisis. So this bill, by everyone's agreement, even those who are going to vote for it tonight, pulls forward an insolvency that is consensus right now going to occur 9 years from now, pulling it forward by 6 months. And so I have to vote against this bill, not because I don't ultimately want to fix an injustice for a very small percentage of people who deserve a few $100s more a month. But the way that we've gone about it, it's going to be costly, and it's being done at a time where we're not plussing the accounts back up. And so I feel like my vote casting an under, I'm likely to be on the losing side. I understand that. None of these amendments are going to pass because if they do, the bill fails. We know that. So anybody that's pulling for one amendment or another, let me just show you how I can tell the future. Not a single one will pass. This bill will be voted out this evening, and it'll be sent to the president's desk. And once the president signs it, he will guarantee that the Social Security Trust Fund will become insolvent 6 months sooner than the 9 months, 8.5 months. Think about it this way, 8.5 years from now versus 9 years from now. It's going to pull $200 billion out, causing that to occur. It's actually going to provide some benefit that I don't believe the beneficiaries deserve. And it's really confusing that handful or that segment of the people who will get the benefit and casting them into a group that I think arguably maybe don't deserve the benefit. Anyone that should, we can take care of, but it's not $200 billion. But that's what happens when you don't have a single committee hearing on a bill. That's what happens when it comes from the House through something called a discharge petition. Bypassing all the processes comes to the Senate, and we never even have a hearing. We're going to have a vote later today for a $200 billion rating of the Social Security Trust Fund that is going to bring insolvency forward from 9 years to 8.5 years. And not a single vote or a single hearing has been held in a single committee on Capitol Hill. Now, folks, if you can't agree on the finances, if you can't agree on the fairness, can we all agree on the process? Something as weighty as this, we should have given it the justice it deserves and have a hearing on it. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against it. And then I'll be standing there reminding my colleagues I told you so when I'm also trying to help them fix the problem they're about to vote on to create. Thank you, Mr. President.
President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the en bloc consideration of the following bills. Calendar number 422, which is S 1348, and calendar 501, which is S 1890.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measures en bloc.
I ask unanimous consent that the committee-reported substitute amendments be considered and agreed to. The bills as amended be considered read a third time en bloc.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bills en bloc.
If there is no further debate,
I ask unanimous consent.
The question is on passage of the bills as amended en bloc. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bills as amended are passed en bloc.
I ask unanimous consent that the committee-reported title amendment to the S 1890 be considered and agreed to, the title of S 1890 as amended be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider with respect to S 1348 and S 1890 be considered, made, and laid upon the table all en bloc.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I want to rise just to spend a couple of moments discussing a bill that we just passed, and it's the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative. The Senate passed this by unanimous consent. This legislation is very important in my home state of Wyoming, something we've been working on for years. The bill would resolve the management status for thousands of acres of federal public lands across 7 counties of the 23 counties in my home state of Wyoming. These acres involve what are known as wilderness study areas. These are land managed solely for preservation, even though they're not included in the National Wilderness Preservation System. Well, the Bureau of Land Management studies these areas, and they study them to determine whether they should be designated as wilderness lands, or if these lands should be returned to multiple use status. Until Congress acts, the Bureau treats all of the lands as if it's wilderness. In other words, these lands currently under study are closed off to almost every use. For the people of Wyoming who rely on access to the land to make a living and for recreation, this just doesn't work. So in 1991, now here we are, we're in 2024, but in 1991, the Bureau of Land Management released a report recommending a balanced approach for these Wyoming wilderness study areas. Specifically, the Bureau of Land Management recommended that Congress designated some of the lands as wilderness and released the majority of the lands back to multiple use. Well, here we are, over 3 decades later, the lands still remain in limbo. That's why some of our counties began to work with me on the Wyoming Public Lands Initiative. And I want to thank these Wyoming County Commissioners for their collaboration going back 9 years, back to 2015. The bill, which I'm proud to sponsor on their behalf, generally follows the recommendations of the 1991 report. It strikes a balance between protecting these special places that people in Wyoming love, while expanding the multiple use areas that our state and local economies rely upon. The bill was developed by the people who live near the land and who will be accessing the land when this bill is enacted. It has been developed really from the ground up by the people who know the land the best. And this legislation resolves a decades-old stalemate. The bill is going to increase conservation. It's going to ensure that other lands can be unlocked and for uses that are important to the people of Wyoming and to our economy. I firmly believe the people of Wyoming, not Washington, should decide how to manage these lands. So I want to thank my friend and colleague, Senator Wyden from the state of Oregon. We work closely together. We serve on several committees together. We live near each other and where we stay when we're in Washington instead of when he's home in Oregon and I'm home in Wyoming. And I look forward to continuing to work with him to get these bills passed into law and through the House and in the near future. So as I see my friend and colleague from Oregon on the floor tonight, I just want to thank him for his years of cooperation and working together as we have on the Committee of Energy and Natural Resources, and thank him for all of his consideration in allowing us to get this bill passed tonight. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Senator for Oregon.
Mr. President, this is a truly historic moment for my home state of Oregon because the Owahis, which are really Oregon's version of the Grand Canyon, really should have secured protection years ago. But finally, as a result of the bipartisan support that my friend from Wyoming and I have, working with the incoming chair of the committee, Mike Lee, and the current leadership, we have been able to pass these important pieces of legislation. And the timing for my home state is really just extraordinary because just yesterday, the congressman from rural Oregon, Congressman Bentz of the 2nd District, we put out a joint statement about how next year we intend to work together and with our constituents to come up with legislation that our whole state, urban and rural, could come together on to protect the ranching way of life in Malheur County and also our incredible treasures. And Congressman Bentz and I said we would work with our respective chambers' leadership to pass the bill into law. And then, Mr. President, overnight, and to the great excitement of people in our states, due to the ending hours of Congress where members are trying to find some common ground, we've been able to work with our leadership in the United States Senate, in this chamber, to get started on what Congressman Bentz and I told our constituents yesterday. And this did not happen by osmosis. The incoming ranking Senator, Martin Heinrich, and the incoming chair, Mike Lee, said that my bill, which cleared the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, S. 1890, the Malheur Community Empowerment for the Oahe Act, that they would allow it to pass the United States Senate tonight as an indication of the goodwill that all parties have pledged for next year. And as the chairman of the committee has noted, in fact, all the chairs, past and present, since I was the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee at one point, understand that that's the key to really making some history in this extraordinarily important committee. And in our conversations with the incoming chairman, Mike Lee, he was particularly interested in the fact that Congressman Bentz and I are going to be working together to get this bill in shape so that people across Oregon will support it. And when he indicated that that was a priority for him, I basically said, that's exactly what we have in mind as Oregonians, what I have in mind as Oregon's senior senator. And I'm very happy to state tonight publicly to the incoming chair of the committee, the senator from Utah, that I intend to work very closely with Congressman Bentz to make this become law. Now, so everybody in Oregon understands this bill does not become law tonight. But what it does is it sends a message from the United States Senate that when you get people of goodwill and willingness to find common ground, you can make real action happen. And the Oahe legislation that I worked for years with ranchers and hunters and fishing families and environmental folks has now passed the United States Senate. That's something that after decades of debate about the future of the Oahe, nobody thought it was going to happen anytime soon. In fact, yesterday people said, well, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Now the United States Senate has acted, and acted, as I say, to protect the ranching way of life in rural Oregon and our treasures. And I hope that tonight's action will give all parties interested in the protection of the treasures of Oahe and interest in the ranching way of life. It should give folks at home the chance to know that we are going to be in a position to, in 2025, with the leadership of the Senate and the House behind this effort, we're going to be in a position in 2025 to make this important legislation the law of the land, and the protection for the Oahes will be permanent and will be in the text of black letter law for all to see. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Virginia.
Mr. President, in 2013, in my first year in the Senate, a 10-year-old child in Virginia, Loudoun County, named Gabriella Miller, passed away from an inoperable brain tumor. Nothing could be worse for a family. Her parents, Ellen and Mark, and her brother suffered greatly in this, but as many do, in an amazing way, in a mysterious way, in a time of suffering, they turned their tragedy into a cause. Shortly after I came to the Senate, Mark and Ellen Miller came to see me and talked to me about their daughter, Gabriella. And they asked me a question. Senator, what percentage of medical research in this country is devoted to pediatric conditions? I thought, well, pediatric, under age 18, maybe it's, 12% of the population, so I guessed 12%. They said less than 1%. Less than 1% of medical research funding in the NIH and other agencies was devoted to pediatric conditions. There was a kind of a, it's a conventional wisdom that, we don't put research into that, but if we can research adult conditions, we can kind of apply it to pediatric conditions, which everyone here knows that's not the case. Many pediatric conditions are very different than adult conditions. So I began to work with the Miller family on a bill to increase research at the NIH and other federal agencies for pediatric conditions, especially pediatric cancers of the kind that killed Gabriella Miller. The following year, in 2014, I partnered with Virginia Congressman and then a Republican leader in the Senate, Eric Cantor, and others to pass the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program to fund NIH research on pediatric cancer. And the 10-year bill that we passed is up for reauthorization this year. I've partnered with Senator Jerry Moran, my colleague from Kansas, to reauthorize it with the support of colleagues on both sides, numerous colleagues. The Republican House has passed a version of this bill. The lead sponsor on the House side is Congresswoman Jennifer Wexton, who is retiring because she has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of supranuclear palsy, which is an advanced form of Parkinson's disease. My colleague Jennifer Wexton is no longer able to speak without an AI-assisted device. But in this last few days of her time in the House, she has made the passing of the reauthorization of the Gabriella Miller Act her chief priority. The reauthorization was included in the health package in the bipartisan version of the CR bill that we negotiated with the House. But that package was left on the cutting room floor of the CR that was just passed the House. And advocates of the bill, including Ellen and Mark Miller and others who care about pediatric research, were bitterly disappointed. I'm going to vote for the CR when it comes over from the House. But if I'm going to have to explain to advocates that I share their disappointment for the fact that this 10-year program, which has now produced more than $125 million in research into pediatric cancer, is going to be left on the floor, I have to at least make an effort here on the floor to authorize this program going forward. The good news is the bill that Representative Wexton has put in the House was authorized flat funding for another 5 years, and I give credit to my colleagues on the Senate Health Committee because the Gabriella Miller Act was reauthorized in the Senate for 10 years at an increasing level of funding, beginning at the current funding level of $12.5 million a year, escalating to $25 million over the course of 10 years. But time is late. No time to fool around. The bill that has passed not only a committee but a House was passed in the House of Representatives, 5-year funding at its current level, $12.5 million a year, to continue to invest in research into children's cancer and pediatric conditions. I respect my colleagues' sincere commitment to responsible federal budgeting. And one of my colleagues, Senator Paul, I've worked with him to hopefully lift an objection that he had to this bill by agreeing to work with him to make sure that there's not other overlapping programs where we're spending money to do the same thing. We have recently talked about other legislative initiatives that we'll work on together. My understanding as I stand here today is with this commitment I've made to Senator Paul, he's dropping any objection to including this by unanimous consent. And I think while it's not everything I hoped, and it's not everything that the Senate Help Committee did in a bipartisan way, it would continue this important program. Gabriella Miller, when she was diagnosed with brain cancer at age 10, didn't go quietly into the good night. I think that's a Dylan Thomas line. She instead said, I'm going to raise every bit of money I can for cancer research. And in the last year of her life, she raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in cancer research on her own with little bake sales and fundraisers. And the brain tumor that was in her brain was the size of a walnut, and she created a nonprofit foundation called the Smashing Walnuts Foundation. And the comments that I make tonight and the effort that I undertake with Representative Wexton truly are to honor her and to thank her parents for their advocacy. In particular, I really want to thank her mother, Ellen Miller, who's been a force of nature in creating this program and keeping it going. And we need to keep it going. It's bipartisan, it's bicameral, and it's making groundbreaking research possible. I ask my colleagues to let it pass into law. And so, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that, as if in legislative session, we should ask the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions be discharged from the further consideration of H.R. 3391, and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report.
H.R. 3391, an act to extend the Gabriella Miller Kids First Pediatric Research Program at the National Institutes of Health and for other purposes.
Without objection, the committee is discharged, and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time.
Without objection.
I know of no further debate on the bill.
Is there further debate? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The bill is passed.
I ask that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kentucky.
Well, we've arrived. We're here at last. Another government shutdown averted. The government will remain open. I'm not sure if that's good news or bad news. People need to know, yes, the government will stay open and it will not be chaotic. Congress can adjourn, which is probably a good thing when Congress adjourns. But the thing about government staying open is we will pass something called a continued resolution. What does that mean? It means we're resolved to continue. Continue as we have for really decades. We will continue to spend money regardless of whether we have it or not. We will continue to spend money at a pace such that we will accumulate about $2 trillion in debt each year. The deficit will be about $2 trillion. Now, the spending is comprised of a lot of different areas. It's about $6.8 trillion in spending, and we bring in about $4.8 trillion in revenue. So it's about a $2 trillion mismatch. A lot of the spending is entitlements. Probably 2/3 of the spending is entitlements, but this body refuses to address entitlements. So as part of the continuing spending tonight, keeping government open, all of the entitlements will be taken off board, and there will be no reforms to entitlements, no reduction in spending in entitlements. They will continue growing somewhere between about 5% and 6% a year. Almost everybody on both sides of the aisle acknowledges that entitlements are the problem. Entitlements are driving the debt. What we vote on, people call a budget, or another word, they call it discretionary spending, is about $1.7 trillion or so, about $2 trillion. Of that $2 trillion, about half's military, half's not military. Well, the military has been taken off the table also, primarily by Republicans, but Democrats complicit as well. No military spending will be addressed, no waste in the military will be addressed, and the Pentagon will not be audited. They've said for decades the Pentagon needs to be audited, and the Pentagon says we're too big to be audited. Leave us alone, we are too big. Occasionally we'll find some things, $500 toilet seats or $800 hammers, things like that. But overall, we have no idea where the money's going, and neither do they. They sometimes talk about hundreds of billions of dollars really literally missing, that they have no idea. But it's taken off the table because the powers that be say military is sacrosanct, cannot be looked at, and must have increased spending. So all the entitlements are going up. That's 2/3 of $6.8 trillion. The remaining $2 trillion is half military. It's going up, and nobody's looking at it either. So we have discretionary. Non-military discretionary spending is part of the budget also. And we couldn't come to an agreement, but other than we're going to be resolved to continue spending at about the pace we are. It'll be short term, and that would be bad enough because the spending will accumulate and is accumulating about a $2 trillion deficit. But that's not enough. This has been a horrendous week for fiscal conservatives because we are not going to just continue as we have been doing, continue loading on the debt. We are also adding to it in a dramatic fashion. This week, there'll be $330 billion added onto the spending. $200 billion of it will be for Social Security. And you say, well, we should want to help people. Why wouldn't we give people or senior citizens more money? Well, if we give new people more money, we have to take it from somewhere. We're going to have to either borrow it or we're going to have to print it. But it has to come from somewhere. Money doesn't grow on trees. So $200 billion increase in spending for Social Security. Where's the money going to come from? Now, I will offer an amendment that would pay for it. My amendment would be to raise the age gradually of Social Security. 3 months a year for about 12 years, and that would pay for the expansion of benefits. I think that's the only responsible way to do this. You want more benefits for people? You can't just, push the bankruptcy of Social Security and say, well, yeah, it'll go bankrupt in about 9 years, but maybe I won't be here, or maybe I won't be alive, and maybe it'll still exist for people. But shouldn't we care about what's going to happen to the future of Social Security? Shouldn't we care about how this is going to be paid for? But it'll be interesting to see how the vote is. I suspect I won't win, but we're going to have a vote on gradually raising the age. But here's the rub of how difficult it is and how far behind the 8 ball we've become. I proposed this solution 12 years ago, 13 years ago. When I did, it fixed 2/3 of the shortfall. If you raise the age gradually from 67 to 70, about 2 or 3 months a year, it wiped out most of the shortfall and fixed the problem 13 years ago. If you do it now, it only gives us 1 more year of solvency before bankruptcy comes. So we've taken a problem that was eminently fixable a decade ago, and at this point, if we were to do, and my amendment were to pass, it would pay for the expansion, but still the system is going bankrupt because we just keep adding stuff to it. Most people don't realize this, but Social Security actually will give you money no matter what your income is if you have teenage children and one of the parents is over 65. Now, somebody thought up this program and said, wow, this would be good. We should help out elderly parents that are taking care of teenagers. You can be a billionaire and file. I know people who are wealthy, whose kids drive Porsches, who are getting $1,500 a month for each of their kids because the dad is 65. Why would we do a program that's not based on income at all? Why would we let anybody join in that? Is that why Social Security is going bankrupt? No, that's just an element, though, of where the money's going. But everything that happens in the city is based on compassion. I feel for people and I want to help people. But nobody does anything based on math. Nobody really looks at this and says, well, shouldn't we do something to make sure it's paid for? What about next decade? What's going to happen to Social Security? Not a care. They just expand it and it's feel good. You know, the free lunch, the mantra of free lunch is good. Here's stuff. Here's manna. Here, we're going to give you more money. Just be content. Take some Soma. Just relax. Here's some more money. But we're destroying the entitlement programs. Social Security is going bankrupt, and we sped up the bankruptcy this week by adding $200 billion. That is going to be concluded tonight. That's $200 billion in brand new spending to a system that was already $2 trillion short. Now, we also gave $30 billion to farmers. That's going to be in the package tonight, too. Now, why do the farmers say they need money? Many farmers are actually pretty well off and doing pretty well, actually. But they say that the tariffs during the first Trump administration hurt them so badly that they're still having reduced exports and they need more money. So we're still paying them for the tariff wars that were begun 4 years ago, and still half the people in the country are jumping up and down saying they want more tariffs. But what are we going to do? Pay off everybody that doesn't benefit from the tariffs? Think about it. If you put tariffs on a steel mill and you say, well, we're not going to let the Chinese sell any steel over here, you have this bright, shiny steel mill and all the 1,000 workers stand in front and they love you because you're going to help them with their jobs and they're going to be more secure. But for every person making steel, there's 80 workers working somewhere buying steel. So what you do is you just ignore the other half of the equation. Why? Because it's easy to see the shiny steel factory. It's easy to see those workers. The 80 workers that are working for other industries, car industry, building warehouses, anybody that uses steel, fences, all these people buying stuff are scattered through small industries and you don't see them. But their economic impact at least equals, but probably exceeds the one you're trying to benefit. We do so many crazy things. So $200 billion to expand Social Security won't be paid for, speeds up the bankruptcy and demise of Social Security. $30 billion for farmers, many of whom have other resources and really are not desperately in need of this. What happens to the borrowing? $230 billion. Well, that's not over. We also are adding $100 billion for disaster. And you say to yourself, well, you know, we got to help people in need. They've had storms, they've had flooding. We got to help them. Well, shouldn't we try to root out the waste and fraud in those systems, that people are stealing money from these things? If you want to know how people steal things and how many people are stealing things, when we did all that COVID stuff, we stopped the economy and we just gave free money to everybody. We actually had foreign scoundrels, foreign fraudsters come in and take tens of millions of dollars. But we also had U.S. citizens, buying Lamborghinis and Bugattis and all kinds of fancy cars on their government. We had people signing up for the program. One of them used an ID that had a picture of Barbie on it and got money. Many of them said, I have 500 workers, and they didn't have any workers. They didn't have a business. So just fraud was rampant throughout it. This happens also in the disaster relief programs as well. People claim things they lost in disasters that didn't exist. But let's put that aside, the waste and fraud in the program, and say, we got to help people. We got to do something about disasters. Well, maybe there ought to be a decision-making process where we say, what's more important, Ukraine or Asheville, North Carolina? Do we have enough money to do both? Well, we do if we borrow it, but when we borrow it, we add to the debt, the Fed buys the debt, and you create inflation. It's no mystery why your goods cost more. During the last 4 years, groceries, meat, poultry, gasoline, rent, everything's gone up on average at least 20%. Now, did it become more precious? Did we all of a sudden lose a supply of things? No, the dollar became weaker. The dollar became diluted because we had to buy all this debt. So it's a bait and switch. What we do is we expand, this week, $200 billion for Social Security, $100 billion for disasters, that's $300 billion, $30 billion for farm subsidies, $330 billion unpaid for. But the people here gathered, the vast majority of them that will vote for this will go home, pat themselves on the back and say, I brought you stuff. Isn't that what you want me to do? Bring you free stuff. Well, it's not free. It has ramifications. They're destroying the dollar. They're destroying the country. And yet it goes on. Because it seems to be easy just to promise people something for nothing. So I have a couple of different solutions. To pay for the Social Security, let's gradually raise the age. 3 months each year. And what it does is it actually pays entirely for this $200 billion expansion and then some. It has to be done. It will be done at some point. I offered it 13 years ago, and every year we've waited, we've gotten further behind the 8 ball, and every year we've waited, we've gotten to the point where it's much more difficult to dig out of this hole. As far as the shutdowns, I'll admit that it's chaotic to go through this every 3 months, every 6 months, every year. There could be a way that we could actually say when there is an impasse and both parties don't agree, we agree to continue spending, but not at the same level. See, the vote today on at least some of the budget, the part that's not going up like this, on a small portion, will continue at the same level. But realize 3/4 of it's going up. We're not keeping it steady. So if we vote to keep it steady, does that really fix the problem? No, if you keep it steady, and even if you didn't increase spending, the budget never balances. Why? Because you're only keeping a very small portion of the budget steady. It's really about 16%. 2/3, 66%, entitlements. The remaining third, half military, half non-military. Military is going up at 3%. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Republicans have a great plan. Come spring, the Republicans are by simple majority going to bust through the military caps. The military caps are put in place, like all other caps, to try to restrain spending, and they're ignored. But in the spring, the first reconciliation package that Republicans will pass with a simple majority is to bust through the military caps. Military doesn't have enough money. We spend more on our military than the next 8 countries combined, and yet it's never enough. People say we're going to find waste and fraud. I'm all for it. I'm a big supporter of looking for waste and fraud. I'm a big supporter of getting rid of it. Guess what? If you don't look at the entitlements, you're not a serious person. If you don't look at the military, you're not a serious person. The problem will go on. In the first Trump administration, $8 trillion were borrowed. I'm a fan of Donald Trump. I supported him. I voted for him. But we borrowed $8 trillion. During the Biden administration, coincidentally, we borrowed another $8 trillion. They were equally fiscally irresponsible. Now, at least during the Trump administration, you could argue there was, COVID and the pandemic and all that. But the reaction was too much, and the lockdowns were not necessary. They didn't save any lives through the lockdowns, and we spent a ton of money that we passed out for people not to work. But the bottom line is when you look at all of this, we have this enormous problem. I'm all for eliminating the waste and fraud. It's not enough. You have to look at the entitlements. You have to look at the military. Currently, we look at only about 16% of the budget. If you eliminated all of that, it's called non-military discretionary, it's part of the budget, you eliminate all of it, which isn't going to happen, the budget still never balances. You have to look at all the spending. We're not looking at any of the entitlement spending. In fact, it's worse. Entitlements are driving the debt, almost everybody agrees with it, and we're expanding the entitlements. Social Security, beginning in 2021, Social Security for the first time pays out more than it brings in taxes. It was the opposite for many years. Social Security brought in more than they spent, and they actually developed and had a reserve. For the last 3 years, Social Security has been paying out more than comes in. 2021, they paid out $50 billion more than came in. 2022, they paid out $22 billion more than came in. Last year, we paid out $40 billion more than we came in. If you had a business, or even if you had a social program, and you were paying out more than you brought in, wouldn't you try to reverse that trend? No, what we did this week is expand Social Security by $200 billion over 10 years. It's $20 billion a year. So if the debt next year for Social Security is going to be about the same as this year, it'd be $40 billion. We added $20 billion to that. What's the math? A 50% increase in our debt. So for someone who's fiscally conservative, this isn't a very good Christmas. This is a Christmas of just doing the same old thing. So when you hear CR or continuing resolution, realize your government is resolved just to continue doing the same thing. They're kicking the can down the road. The debt's going to continue to accumulate, and they're not doing anything to fix it. So don't be pleased with your people. Look closely. Who are my representatives, and are they doing the right thing? So we're going to offer a pay-for the Social Security. That would be one of my amendments tonight. We're also going to offer something called the Government Shutdown Protection Act. And what it will do is it says when there is an impasse, when Republicans and Democrats don't agree, that the spending would continue at a reduced level. The level we chose was enough to try to bring both sides together to actually form an agreement, but also we chose a number that would be enough of a cut to actually put us on a path to balance. So if my amendment were to pass, government wouldn't shut down from here on out, but the spending would be at a 6% reduced level. This actually balances the budget, and it's a pretty significant cut. Most of them will say, oh, it's too much, we can't vote for it. But the thing is even if my cuts were to go into place, even if my amendment were to pass, a 6% cut, it would take 5 years to get to balance in 1 year. Not to get rid of any debt that we've accumulated, but just to get to an annual balance. And they are like, oh, woe is me. We could never do it. We can't cut people. People deserve money. People deserve stuff. We have to give them more stuff. Do you know that the European Union, 16 out of 28 countries in the European Union, who many of them are considered to be socialist, actually balance their budget? I met with a socialist from Sweden. He was more conservative than everybody across the aisle. He was more conservative than half the Republicans up here because they thought that actual entitlements should be based on the economy. Their entitlements actually go down when the economy goes down. If the economy shrinks, their entitlements shrink. Just everybody knows it's going to happen. It's a bad year, you're going to get a little bit less. People would go nuts here. We do the opposite. So during the last 4 years, they created so much inflation that people's costs went up 20%. What do? We have to give cost of living adjustments to those on Social Security, and we did. But we were short even more money, and it made the problem even worse and sped up the bankruptcy of Social Security. So my amendment would say we actually have to reduce spending. Now, some people say to conservatives, both in my party and the others, they say, oh, you people are unrealistic. You'll never vote to raise the debt ceiling. But even if I had my way, and we got cuts significant enough that I think the American people would accept, but most of this body wouldn't, and we balanced the budget in 5 years, we would still accumulate debt over those 5 years. And I would vote to raise the debt ceiling during that brief period of time as we are on the way towards balancing our budget. But none of that's going to happen. what we are doing this week and what both parties will be complicit in, and I mean both parties. Every Democrat here will vote for this bill, I assume. Every Democrat will vote to continue to be resolved to spend money at a rate that is $2 trillion more than comes in. But half the Republicans will join them. There'll be a minority of Republicans who will say, we're conservative and we shouldn't spend this much money. But we will offer amendments tonight, and people will get to decide where they are. And people at home will have to decide, are we going to live this way? How long can we live this way? What causes inflation? Can we not have representatives who believe that balancing our budget is the appropriate thing to do? So the amendments I offer today are such that I think they're necessary. I think they'll help us to save Social Security from bankruptcy, but they won't be very popular here. But I offer them in hopes that people will see them across America and say, at least somebody cares about the solvency of Social Security. At least somebody has the guts to say, this is what we would do to try to save and preserve Social Security, rather than just giving free stuff to everybody and saying, no big deal, you can have more. What? You want more? Here's more. Somebody's got to ask how we're going to pay for this. Someone's got to be responsible up here, and if you watch closely who votes on this amendment, you'll see who are the truly fiscally responsible people in the Senate. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield back my time.
Mr. President.
Senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, today is a day to celebrate. The Senate is moments away from keeping a promise we made to the American people when Social Security became law. Folks will get the benefits they earned. State and local workers in Louisiana and other states across the country are no different than other Americans who paid into the system. State and local government workers deserve their full Social Security benefit. Now, with the passage of the Social Security Fairness Act, they will get it. This act repeals WEP, GPO, that stands for Windfall Elimination Provision and Government Pension Offset, and stops Social Security from punishing public workers for the crime of serving their communities. Nurses, teachers, firefighters, police officers, widows of those who worked in the Social Security system will be made whole by what we do here tonight. I had a civics teacher in high school who always delighted in the fact that she taught someone who went on to become a member of Congress. And Betty worked her whole life teaching in public schools. And because of GPO, when her husband passed away, her husband worked at Exxon Refinery, I believe, if I remember correctly, her Social Security benefit was cut to a fraction because she had worked in the public sector as a teacher. Under this system, she would have been better in terms of Social Security benefits if she had never worked at all. Most of us have a Betty in their life, in their state, in their hometown, or in their family. Often a police officer or a firefighter, a first responder who served us, and now we have the opportunity to thank them for that service. With a vote today, we're standing up for folks like Betty and everyone like her across our nation. It's a day to celebrate. And, Mr. President, with that, I yield.
Senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I rise tonight to make a simple but important point on behalf of the brave, freedom-loving citizens of the Republic of Georgia. It's time for the United States to stand alongside the brave nation of Georgia, the citizens of which went to the polls recently and voted to elect their own leadership. It's time to impose heavy sanctions on the individuals and institutions now trying to thwart the democratic will of the people of the Republic of Georgia. And now is the time to act. This is the 20th of December, 2024. We don't need to act in mid-January. We need to act now while the people of Georgia are taking to the freezing streets in towns like Tbilisi and